So, when you think of Gothic horror, what's the first name that pops into your head? For most of us, there's one guy who casts this huge, dark shadow over the whole genre. But what if I told you there's more? In this explainer, we're going to step out of that shadow. We're going to dig up some of the forgotten masters of psychological dread, writers who were, I'd argue, just as terrifying and maybe, just maybe, even more influential.
Yeah, see, while one name pretty much dominates the whole conversation, there's this entire hidden world of Victorian terror just waiting for us to find it. And it's a world filled with authors who are every bit as skilled, every bit as terrifying, and in some really surprising ways, even more important to what horror is today.
Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room. Edgar Allan Poe. The guy was an absolute genius, no question about it. But here's the thing, he wasn't writing in some kind of vacuum. He was part of a much bigger literary movement, really a symptom of a super anxious time. So to really get the darkness in his work, we've got to first understand the fears that were bubbling up all around him.
You have to picture it, right? The Victorian era was just bonkers. Factories were belching smoke, cities were blowing up in size, and all these new scientific breakthroughs were suddenly questioning everything people thought was true about the world, about God, about their place in the universe. It was the perfect storm for fear. You had fear of progress, fear of the unknown, and this really intense, kind of morbid fascination with death and the supernatural.
And it's out of this collective anxiety that you get these new voices in horror, these, well, you could call them architects of fear, who started exploring some really unique and terrifying new ground. So, you ready? Let's go meet the masters who really perfected the art of the scare.
All right, first up on our tour of forgotten masters is Sheridan Le Fanu. He was an Irish writer, and his whole thing was psychological horror. I mean, this guy did not do cheap jump scares. No way. He was all about that slow, creeping dread, the kind that gets right under your skin and just lives there.
Just listen to this line from his most famous story, Carmilla. I have been in love with no one, and never shall, unless it should be with you. Wow, right? That's not just a threat, it's a promise, and it's chillingly intimate. It just perfectly captures this predatory, psychological obsession that was so groundbreaking for the time. It's desire and danger, all twisted together.
And this is the really crucial part. We're talking long before Bram Stoker's Dracula ever showed up. Le Fanu gave us Carmilla, which is basically the blueprint for the seductive, classy vampire we all know today. He cared way more about atmosphere and what's going on inside your head than he did about blood and guts. He was digging into these themes of forbidden desire and moral decay that honestly still feel pretty daring.
Okay, next up we have Mary Elizabeth Braddon. She was the undisputed queen of what they called sensation fiction. And these books were basically the binge-worthy thrillers of their day. We're talking shocking twists, bigamy, secret identities, murder, the whole shebang. And it was all happening behind the supposedly respectable curtains of the middle class. Her genius? She took horror out of the spooky old castles and plopped it right down in the one place you thought you were safe, the perfect Victorian home.
Check out this quote from her smash hit novel, Lady Audley's Secret. However badly a man may speak of his wife, he is never pleased to hear another man say the same thing. See? The horror here isn't some ghost clanking chains. It's the dark secrets, the lies, the two-faced hypocrisy that's hiding just under the polite surface of society.
So Braddon's big move was making the familiar absolutely terrifying. You have to remember, for society obsessed with the home being this sacred, safe space away from the crazy industrial world, this was a huge deal. It was like the ultimate violation. She basically showed her readers that the scariest monsters weren't hiding in the closet. They could be the people you trusted the most. She turned that perfect home into this claustrophobic stage for blackmail, madness, and murder. Chilling stuff.
And for our last author, let's talk about Amelia B. Edwards. So, if Le Fanu was the master of the slow burn dread and Braddon owned the domestic thriller, well, Edwards absolutely perfected the short, sharp shock of a classic supernatural ghost story.
I mean, listen to this line from her famous story, The Phantom Coach. For the entire preceding week, that phantom had been coming to me in my dreams. That just oozes classic Gothic atmosphere, doesn't it? It taps right into that pure, primal fear of some persistent, otherworldly thing that you just can't get away from.
Edwards was an absolute expert at this. She could craft these tight, concise stories about ghosts and spectral encounters like nobody's business. She knew exactly how to build suspense and then deliver a really chilling punchline in just a few pages. It just goes to show you don't need a 500-page novel to create true dread. It was a total masterclass in getting maximum impact with minimum words.
Okay, so we've met the writers, but what were they actually writing about? What were the specific fears they were plugging into? Let's take a closer look and really dissect the anatomy of Victorian terror, what really haunted their nightmares.
One of their biggest obsessions was madness. Think about it. In an age that was completely fixated on order, reason, and self-control, the idea of your mind just coming apart was the ultimate horror. And we're not just talking about going crazy. This was about the complete and total loss of who you are, a terror that was made so much worse by the truly horrifying real-life stories coming out of asylums back then.
And their fear of science was really different from ours. We worry about AI taking over or some technological apocalypse. For them, it was much more of a moral and spiritual fear. It was this deep anxiety about playing God, about creating monsters like Frankenstein did, and about maybe losing your soul in this relentless chase for knowledge. It was a crisis of faith just as much as it was a crisis of science.
And then, of course, you've got the supernatural. But here's the kicker. For them, this wasn't just make-believe. Spiritualism, seances, that stuff was hugely popular. A lot of people genuinely believed that the veil between our world and the next was super thin. So ghosts weren't just a fun campfire story. They were a terrifyingly real possibility.
The horror in these stories wasn't just about what happened, but also where it happened. The setting wasn't just a pretty backdrop. A lot of the time, the place itself was the monster. It was an active player in the terror.
Just think about it for a second. That decaying mansion, it's not just a house, it's a tomb, trapping everyone inside with the heavy weight of the past. Those foggy, gaslit London streets, not just a city, it's a maze, a labyrinth, where who knows what is hiding. And all those locked rooms and secret passages, they're literally the physical form of buried secrets and the feeling that you just can't escape your own dark destiny.
So, okay, why does any of this matter today? Well, it's because these forgotten architects of fear, they literally built the foundations of the horror we know and love. Their ghosts are still around, haunting the books we read and the movies we watch. And hey, if you want to dive into this world yourself, here's a great little reading list to get you started. If you're into psychological vampires and that slow burn dread, you absolutely have to read Carmilla. If you're a fan of modern domestic thrillers, like Gone Girl, then you'll love Lady Audley's Secret. And if you just want a shot of pure atmospheric terror, you just can't beat a classic ghost story like The Phantom Coach.
So, the Victorians wrote about what scared them. Runaway industry, science going too far, secrets buried in the home. Which leaves us with one last kind of chilling question to think about, doesn't it? What are our greatest anxieties today? And what kind of monsters will those fears create for the horror stories of tomorrow?